Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Do Hongyu. Coming up in this edition, China has reported overall positive changes in the real estate market after local governments rolled out measures to ease restrictions in the property sector. Monday marks the first anniversary of the latest round of the Hamas-Israel conflict, with the humanitarian situation in Gaza continuing to worsen. And the U.S. government has released $100 million to help the impacted areas recover from the destruction of Hurricane Helene. We begin in China. The world's second-largest economy has reported overall positive changes in the real estate market after local governments rolled out measures to ease restrictions in the property sector. The Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development says over 130 cities have presented over 2,000 projects launched by developers. Many cities have seen a rise in visits to property projects by over 50% from a year ago, while transaction volumes are on the rise in provinces such as Guizhou and Shandong. In late September, major cities across the country introduced a new wave of policy adjustments aimed at revitalizing the property market. Gongming spoke with industry experts to explore the potential impacts of these changes.
Starting October 1st, Beijing introduced new property policies focused on easing purchase restrictions and increasing credit support. The minimum down payment for first-time buyers has dropped from 20% to 15%, and from 30% to 20% for second homes, easing financial pressure and facilitating both first-time buyers and those looking to upgrade their homes.
The new policies have made significant changes in areas like mortgage interest rates and down payment ratios, which will lower transaction costs for consumers in need. This makes it easier for first-time home buyers to purchase a home.
Beijing's real estate market has shown promising signs under these policy incentives. In the 3 days following the new policy release, the number of viewings for new homes in Beijing increased by 92.5% compared to the same period last year, with purchase agreements doubling. Viewings for second-hand homes also rose by 104.1% year-on-year.
Since the new policies came out, we've seen a rise in customer inquiries, whether they're looking to buy or sell a home. Around 90% are looking to upgrade their homes. Some clients were hesitant before, but the new policy has made many feel that now is a good time to make a move.
In addition to Beijing, major cities such as Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou have introduced similar measures, including lower down payment requirements and the easing of district-specific purchase restrictions.
As the new policies take effect, we expect a rise in visits to real estate agencies and property viewings after the National Day holiday. We also anticipate that property prices will soon stabilize across the country, driven by Beijing and other top-tier cities.
According to the Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development, cities conducting promotional activities reported over a 50% year-on-year increase in visits to real estate projects during the National Day holiday. Some properties in Guangzhou saw over 150 visits per day, up 200% from normal levels. Preliminary data from Hunan province shows a 106% month-on-month increase in new home viewings and an 80% rise in second-hand home viewings.
With the introduction of new real estate policies in China's 4 major cities, industry insiders believe that the measures taken by multiple departments to optimize housing policies will help address reasonable housing needs and improve people's living conditions. These efforts are also expected to boost market confidence and contribute to the recovery of the property market.
That was Gongming on potential impacts of China's real estate policy adjustments. Turning to the Middle East, Monday marks 1 year since the latest round of conflict between Hamas and Israel broke out. On October 7th last year, Hamas militants struck a musical festival in southern Israel, killing more than 1,000 people and taking about 250 people hostage. Israel responded with a devastating military offensive on the Gaza Strip. Israeli bombardments have triggered a humanitarian crisis in Gaza and displaced much of the enclave's 2.3 million people, leading to genocide allegations at the World Court, which Israel firmly denies. The Gaza Health Ministry says about 42,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks since October 7th. In Israel, the official death toll stands at about 1,200. Meanwhile, more than 500 healthcare workers and more than 130 Palestinian journalists have also been killed. For more about the humanitarian situation in Gaza, Li Qiuyuan spoke to Georgios Petropoulos, head of the sub-office and the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Gaza.
Israel has bombed areas, including UN schools, turned into shelters, supposed to be designated safe havens. How dire is the situation facing the UN and other aid agencies helping Palestine?
We've seen 6 schools that have been turned to shelters bombed just in the last week. So not only are they continuing to be bombed, but there's a pace that's been increased in that. You've heard us say before that there is no safe place in Gaza. This is continuing. We're almost now to 42,000 dead. We're slowly coming to 100,000 injured. These are tragic numbers. They continue to creep up without any kind of ceasefire optimism, really, in our short future. The situation is quite grim. We are now at this catastrophic phase that we've warned the world about. People live in tents in the cold now at night, and they continue to not really be sure whether they're going to wake up alive in the morning. You walk around or you drive around, there's puddles of water everywhere, there's sewage, and we're even seeing that the supplies that come in are so few that if we give someone a tent, they'll sell it to get food, and then they still need a tent. So the people are in this terrible situation where they don't know if they're going to feed their family or keep them warm, and certainly there's no chance for them to keep them safe.
And reports also say food supplies to Gaza have fallen sharply in recent weeks because Israeli authorities have introduced a new customs rule on some humanitarian aid. What have you heard about this rule, and how is Gaza coping?
This is not the first time that war is brought to Gaza. In the last escalations of conflict, what we saw was that the amount of products, humanitarian, private sector, that were allowed to enter Gaza during that time of conflict for the weeks or months that it took were actually escalated. This is something normal for humanitarian aid. The amount of humanitarian supplies, certainly that are coming into Gaza, should be commensurate with the humanitarian needs. There should be a free flow of supplies. This can be food, it can be medicine, it can be hospital beds if you need to staff up or to rebuild a hospital. That is not the case in Gaza. It's not been the case since the first day of this war. And what we're seeing in the last few weeks is increasing demands put on our supply line and humanitarian importation, not only in the amount, but on the customs, on the regulations and the rules. Yes, this is a new rule that's been put in place. I also want to underline here that what people in Gaza eat is not just the food that we bring from the UN and NGOs. They also rely heavily on the private sector that is able to bring them the things that we cannot. Fresh food, sundry items, shampoo, the things that you need to basically be well-fed, hygienic, clean, and to live your life in the best way that you can in a dignified manner. Without both the humanitarian and the private sector supply lines, what we're seeing is a lot more desperation, certainly misery, and we're going to have, I think, some bad news in the next time that we have snapshots around the hunger and malnutrition situation in Gaza.
That was Georgios Petropoulos of the Sub-Office and the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs in Gaza on the local humanitarian situation. In Europe, crowds are gathering for pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli demonstrations and memorial events. Many are calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Security officials in several countries are at a higher stage of alert over possible terror attacks or violent protests. Natalie Carney reports from Berlin.
Thousands of people have been gathering all across Europe as the conflict in Gaza reaches its one-year mark. Here in the German capital, Berlin, in the district of Neukölln, hundreds of people have been gathering in support of Palestine and against what they call a genocide in the Gaza Strip.
We demand an immediate stop of all arms and weapons being delivered to Israel and the continuous impunity Israel receives from Germany and other nations in this world.
We do not allow them to deny the rights of Palestinians to stand on the streets and express their rage against this injustice.
Following the events in Israel on October the 7th of last year, a near total ban was placed on pro-Palestinian rallies. This one has been allowed to go ahead with substantial police presence, but its location has been limited. Meanwhile, at Berlin's iconic Brandenburg Gate, hundreds are gathering in support of Israel and to condemn Hamas's crimes against both Israelis and Palestinians.
We have two problems in this society, right-wing extremism and Islamism, and we have to fight both together. That's why I'm here.
Protests are also taking place across Europe. In the Spanish capital, Madrid, hundreds have staged a flash mob in a call to end military operations in the Gaza Strip and the Israeli-occupied West Bank. And in Paris, French Jews have gathered to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the Hamas attacks in Israel. Memorial services have also been taking place across the United Kingdom for all the lives lost on all sides as the conflict in the Middle East escalates.
That was Natalie Carney from Berlin. Turning to North America, the U.S. federal government has released $100 million in emergency funding in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. The relief efforts center around destroyed bridges and roads in the hardest hit state of North Carolina. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris visited the state to observe recovery efforts. Poppy and Putin has more.
The trail of destruction left by Helene has upended infrastructure across communities in North Carolina. Destroyed roads and bridges have impeded rescue and recovery efforts. Scores are still feared missing. Authorities are unsure how many, as floodwaters swamped towns and homes were washed away. Federal disaster teams and National Guard personnel were deployed in the aftermath of the disaster, assisting local authorities with debris cleanup, delivering supplies, and coordinating search and rescue missions. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris was in North Carolina Saturday to survey the damage.
The work that is happening here and that continues really is the best of what we can do to bring federal, state, and local resources together in a way that is coordinated with one purpose and one purpose only, which is bringing relief, support, and help to the people who are most in need and desperate for help and desperate to be seen and heard.
As Harris engaged in briefing meetings, the U.S. Transportation Department announced an initial disbursement of $100 million of federal funds to rebuild roads and bridges. Meanwhile, another storm system is developing off the Gulf of Mexico. On Sunday, Tropical Storm Milton gained strength to become a hurricane. Forecasters are warning that it will make landfall on the west coast of Florida in a matter of days, less than 2 weeks after Helene struck the Sunshine State. President Joe Biden sent a letter Friday to congressional leaders urging support for any needed funding, following an announcement from the Federal Emergency Agency that it's running out of money for disaster relief.
That was Poppy and Putin reporting from the United States. In Africa, Rwanda says the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo has refused to sign an agreement aimed at resolving the M23 conflict. French President Emmanuel Macron has proposed a three-way meeting with leaders of both sides to resolve their differences. Athen Toshobia has more.
On Saturday, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame met with the French President Emmanuel Macron on the sidelines of the Francophone summit in Paris. According to the statement from the Rwandan presidency, the discussions between the two leaders focused on the strengthening bilateral ties and addressing regional insecurity through concrete actions. The two leaders are believed to have reiterated their support for regional initiatives in addressing conflicts in Eastern DRC. Following the meeting, Rwanda's Foreign Affairs Minister Olivier Nduhungirehe, who is also in Paris, revealed that the Congolese government had refused to sign an agreement that is aimed to resolving the conflict in Eastern DRC. The agreement, set for signing on September 14th, was intended to address the ongoing crisis in Eastern DRC, which has displaced over 1.7 million people. While French President Macron proposed a three-way meeting, President Kagame and President Tshisekedi of DRC held separate talks with Macron instead. Tensions between Rwanda and DRC have escalated since the resurgence of the M23 rebel groups in 2021. The DRC insists on the withdrawal of the Rwandan troops from the Congolese territory, accusing them of supporting M23, a claim Kigali denies. Rwanda has expressed frustrations with the lack of attention to the root causes of the conflict, particularly the persecution of the Kinyarwanda-speaking Congolese, leading to a refugee crisis. President Kagame has recently stressed the need to focus on the reasons behind the displacement of the Kinyarwanda-speaking communities, questioning why these continue to face injustice in their home country. Kagame insists that addressing these critical issues is key in addressing the M23 conflict. Rwanda supports both Rwanda and Nairobi peace processes in bringing the lasting solution to the conflict in the eastern DRC.
That was Athen Tashobia reporting from Rwanda. Before we go, here's a recap of today's top stories. China has reported overall positive changes in the real estate market after local governments rolled out measures to ease restrictions in the property sector. Monday marks the first anniversary of the latest round of the Hamas-Israel conflict, with crowds gathering in Europe for a ceasefire in Gaza. And the U.S. government has released $100 million to help the impacted areas recover from the destruction of Hurricane Helene. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports, and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Do Hongyu. Thank you for listening.